historical changes from the 1960s to the 1990s included the emergence of the civil rights movements, the large-scale deregulations within the West, the abolishment of oppressive regimes such as the apartheid and communism in the Eastern Bloc, increased globalization, and a rise in number of non-European immigrants. During this period, there was a greater emphasis placed on equal rights, dignity, and self-expression. It was against this background Charles Taylor developed his seminal work on the notion of recognition as an essential form and aspect of self-fulfillment and the danger of misrecognition. Within this presentation, I'll be looking at the impact of globalization and the rise of multiculturalism with regards to what Taylor determined as essential. Taylor emphasized the idea that the way we are recognized plays a vital role in the shaping and determining of self. The shift from the previously conservative Eurocentric ideologies of Western societies to the focus on equal rights, global citizenship, and the liberal democracy ushered in the importance of recognition and the new understanding of individual identity. Within his work, Taylor draws heavily on Hegel and Rousseau to provide the foundation for his modern idea of authenticity, recognition, and self-fulfillment. Rousseau proposed a universal application of rights, dignities, and recognition to all citizens, with a rigid disregard for differences. While Hegel proposed that recognition not simply be universal recognition, but rather we can only flourish to the extent we are recognized in our own unique self. The idea that each of us has an original way of being human. This is fundamental to our recognition. Based on the works of Rousseau and Hegel, Taylor developed and proposed two modes of politics, the politics of equal dignity and the politics of difference. Although both based on the notion of equal respect, they come into conflict with one another. Politics of dignity is based on the idea that all are to be treated universally the same and have universal rights, irrespective of any differences. While the politics of difference holds everyone should be recognized for their unique identity as an individual and as a culture, and not be forced into any mold but hold them true to themselves. As a result of globalization and the deregulation of immigration policies within the Western world, saw a mass migration from non-European countries, which raised the social and political issues regarding the management and the rights of these diverse groups. The 1990s saw an eruption of global identity crisis. On one hand, nationalists argued that the mass migration erodes national identities and their right to self-determination, and on the other hand, minorities demanded recognition and equal rights for all. A major challenge faced by governments in regards to multiculturalism and cultural recognition is dealing with the sense of marginalization of the minorities without compromising the basic principles of liberal democracy. Taylor seemingly rejected the politics of equal dignity, arguing that a fair and difference-blind society would ultimately result in minorities being forced into the mold of the dominant culture, while on the other hand he defends the politics of difference, recognizing also the right to their own cultural identities, which is essential to the self-fulfillment and self-realization. Taylor suggested that a truly liberal society must remain neutral in the concept of the good life, not imposing the ideals on minorities, instead allowing individuals the right to have their own cultural identity and concept of good life. However, Taylor inconsistently applies these principles to the Canadian case. Canada has been acknowledged as one of the first countries to adopt a multicultural policy and has historically been willing to make concessions to recognize distinct societies such as Quebec. Quebec was able to pass a number of linguistic regulations that place certain language restrictions in the name of collective goal of survival. These regulations included who can send children to English language schools, if businesses have more than 50 employees to be run in French, and outlaws commercial signage in any language other than French. In 1982, Canada adopted the Canadian Charter of Rights, which defined individual rights as well as guaranteed equal treatment and protections of all citizens. Quebec argued the move to give the Charter precedent over their own regulations imposed a form of liberal society that was so foreign to it that it could only accommodate if surrendered its own unique identity. In response to the Charter, the Meach Amendments were proposed to recognize and preserve Quebec as a distinct cultural society and make this recognition the basis for interpretation of the Charter. However, for many English Canadians, this was fundamentally unacceptable and was argued that it ran against the basic provisions of the Charter. Within the Canadian case, the fundamental question was whether the collective and cultural rights would be acknowledged and prevail over the universal application of equal rights in the basis of liberal democracy. On one hand, it was argued that the politics of equal dignity is inhospitable with the differences, as it insists on a rigid application of dominant mold without taking into account the possibility of collective goals. On the other hand, it is argued that embracing collective goals on behalf of a national group can be inherently discriminatory, as it involves treating insiders and outsiders differently. Interestingly, Taylor defends Quebec's stance in protecting and preserving its cultural rights. He argues that Quebec is correct in endorsing their view of the good life, rather than remaining neutral. He further suggests that Quebec could be a society with strong cultural goals while still being a liberal democracy, as long as it is capable of respecting diversity of minority groups. It could be argued that Taylor inconsistently applies his principles of neutrality to the Canadian case, while overemphasizing the cultural rights of a particular group while at the disadvantage of another. Although Taylor's modes of politics provide an interesting foundation for the modern notion of recognition and identification, there are some issues with both modes. With the increase in globalization and rise in multiculturalism, the issue of recognition and self-realization of individual identity has become paramount within today's society. The politics of equal dignity emphasizes the universal application of rights and dignities only to the extent that they apply to one cultural standard above another, resulting in minorities being forced into a mold. The politics of difference recognizes the importance of cultural and individual identity, but raises the fundamental issue of whether cultural and collective rights prevail over individual rights. Within Western society, the application of both modes are emphasized through liberalism as the basis of application and realization. However, liberalism is not a neutral meeting ground for all cultures. Rather, it is a political expression of one culture that is seemingly incompatible with others.